Okay, guys, we're back. We have chapter 9 from Wish. Come to my house after school tomorrow, Howard said on the bus the next morning. I have a plan. What kind of plan? I asked. A plan for catching that dog. Wishbone? His name is Wishbone. Remember, I told you. Howard took a bite of his toast that he brought on the bus with him. Whatever, he said. We still need a better plan than a map. Well, I don't see why we can't... Don't move, I said, sitting up and grabbing Howard's knee. His eyes got wide. What's wrong? Take off your glasses. Real slow. Why? Just do it, I snapped, a little louder than I meant to say it. Took his glasses off and then squinted over at me. There's an eyelash right there, I said, pointing to one of the thick lenses. I need it. Why? To make a wish. A wish? If you blow on an eyelash, you get to make a wish. So I took the glasses from him, and I pressed my finger on the lens, and I held it up so he could see that tiny little reddish eyelash. See? I said. Then I closed my eyes, made my wish, and blew, sending that eyelash out into the air where it disappeared, probably setting on the dirty floor with clumps of dust and chewed up gum and trampled spelling tests that everybody left behind on the bus. What'd you wish for? Asked Howard. I can't tell you. Why not? Jeez, Howard. I flopped back against the seat, rolling my eyes. What? I explained to him that if you tell your wish, then it won't come true. Everybody knows that, I added. Howard wiped his glasses with the end of his t-shirt and put them back on his face. I've made a wish every single day since the 4th grade, I told him. Howard's eyes bugged out at me. You must want a lot of stuff. No, I shook my head. Just one thing, I said. I always wish for the same thing, every single time. The minute I said that, I regretted it. I knew what he was going to say next, and sure enough, he did. Well, if you're making the same wish every single time, it must not be coming true then. So what's the point? Seems kind of dumb to me. I felt my face turning red and that familiar feeling of anger starting to churn in my stomach. Because someday it will come true, I hollered at him, making a bunch of kids turn around in their seats and stare at me. Howard looked at me over the top of his glasses, leaning down, and said, Pineapple. I kicked his backpack hard, sending it sliding out into the aisle of the bus. And I confess, I felt a flicker of regret when some kids laughed at that. But Howard, he just picked it up, brushed the dirt off it, and said, Pineapple, Charlie. Come on, remember? I held on to that mad feeling all morning, taking every opportunity I could to shoot dirty looks across at Howard, or to bump him real hard over by the pencil sharpener when I would walk past him. I never should have told him about my wishing. I'd never told anybody. And now that I had, well, it kind of did sound dumb. Why would anyone want to make the same wish every day if it never came true? Maybe I should just give up. But then guess what happened? You'll never guess. I looked at the clock and it was exactly 11:11. I closed my eyes and I made my wish. By the time I got home from school that day, my mad feelings about Howard were kind of gone, and I was glad that he had a plan to catch Wishbone. When I told Bertha I was going to his house the next day, she was just tickled pink. She kept telling me how good I was to be friends with Howard, because the other kids were so mean to him. Even in church, they're mean. Can you believe that? I didn't tell her that I sure could believe it, especially with the likes of Audrey Mitchell in that so-called church family. They weren't such a nice bunch. That afternoon, Howard dropped into the seat next to me on the way home from the bus and said, You could borrow my brother Lenny's bike. What for? So that you can ride it home. It's faster and a lot better than walking. He took a bag of smashed potato chips out of his backpack and emptied the crumbs into his mouth. I got a real good plan, he said, munching through the crumbs. You know, for catching Wishbone. And wasn't that just like Howard? To go right on wanting to help me after I'd even kicked his backpack and been mean to him like I did yesterday. He was good-hearted. So when the bus stopped at his house, I followed him and Dwight across the weed-filled yard, up to those rickety steps, past that ratty-looking couch, and into that sad-looking house. When I stepped inside, I didn't know where to look first. There was a hamster cage on the coffee table, a drum set in the corner, stacks of books and magazines lining up against the walls, some kind of tree that was planted in a rusty bucket near the window, and the floor was just covered with blankets and pillows and shoes and board games, and plastic bowls with some popcorn kernels left in them, some pretzel crumbs. The walls were covered with crayon artwork that was on construction paper, and school papers with gold star stickers, things that said "nice job" written at the top. And I could see that Mrs. Odom's rutabaga trick, as far as trying to get Howard's brother Cotton not to write on the walls, was not really working too well, because there were lots of drawings with colored marks along the bottoms of the wall where he could reach. Howard just stepped over the pillows and stuff and motioned for me to follow him into the kitchen. "Mama, Charlie's here," he said. Mrs. Odom turned from the sink and smiled the nicest smile. It was a real smile. "Well, hey," she said. She wiped her hands on her apron and then put an arm around my shoulder and gave me a little squeeze. "Howard told me you're his backpack buddy at school," she said. "And about that Wishbone dog." Then she started going on about how Gus and Bertha were just so happy to have me here with them in Colby. And she asked me, weren't those just beautiful? You know, those Blue Ridge Mountains? Weren't they just heaven on earth? After that, she put a cake with pink and purple flowers in a cardboard box from the grocery store onto the table and told us all to have some. The next thing I knew, that tiny little kitchen was just filled with boys bustling and pushing and poking and grabbing at that cake. They didn't even use plates or forks or anything. They just cut a slice and ate it right there, dropping crumbs all over the floor. And Mrs. Odom didn't seem to mind one bit. The oldest boy was Burl, and the only dark-haired one. All of them had red hair. He was loud-talking and friendly-faced, with a shadow of a mustache growing in over his lip. Then the next oldest was Lenny. He was wearing a greasy, stained t-shirt. He had freckled arms. They were long and skinny, and he kept punching Dwight and elbowing Burl. And next came Howard and Dwight, who were only a year or two apart. They could have passed for twins, except Howard wore glasses, and he had that up-and-down walk. The youngest brother was Cotton, dirty-faced and sticky-fingered, legs all covered in scrapes and bruises and Band-Aids. Mrs. Odom gave us some water in paper cups and made rounds around the kitchen, just kissing and hugging each one of her boys. It didn't take a genius to know that Bertha had been right about the Odoms and their good hearts. I don't know why, but I felt shy and out of place then there, with all that noise and energy bouncing around, and just sheer goodness clinging to the inside walls of that sad-looking house. It wasn't so sad on the inside. Howard and I sat on the couch that was out on the porch, and he told me about his plan to catch Wishbone. He had it all written down in a notebook, and it even had pictures drawn with colored pencils. "Do you think it'll work?" I asked. "Sure." Howard closed his notebook and hugged it close to his chest. Then we sat in silence watching Lenny and Cotton fill a plastic bucket with rocks, dragging it to the side of the yard where they were building some kind of wall. Dwight rode his bike round and round in the yard, stirring up clouds of that red clay dust from the dirt, while Burl hollered at him to stop because he was trying to change the oil in his truck. They were a lively bunch. Then me and Howard just decided to look for Wishbone some more. So we spent the rest of the afternoon tromping through the woods, wandering up and down the side of the road, but we finally gave up. By the time we got back to Howard's house, Mrs. Odom was telling everybody to wash up for supper. "Stay and have supper with us, Charlie," she said. And before I could say anything or object, Mrs. Odom added, "I'll just call Bertha and make sure it's okay with her." So Mr. Odom's driving a load of lumber over to Charlotte so you could sit right there in his chair for supper. So I joined them. We sat at that table, and before I even knew what was happening, Howard grabbed my right hand and Dwight grabbed my left hand, and they all bowed their heads while Burl said the blessing. He thanked the Lord for nearly everything under the sun, including the deviled eggs on the table and the plate in front of him. And then everybody said amen after the prayer. And they just dove into that food like they hadn't even eaten in a week. Mrs. Odom kept jumping up to get more pork chops, pour some more milk. It seemed like she couldn't even walk past one of those boys without patting them on the shoulder or kissing the top of their heads. I tried to imagine taking Howard to my house back in Raleigh. It'd be quiet and dark. My school papers would not be taped up on the wall. And my mama would not be giving me kisses on the top of my head. There wouldn't be any cake with pink and purple flowers. And if Howard stayed for supper, he and I would eat pork and beans and potato chips, or maybe a bologna sandwich in front of the TV. And nobody would say a blessing. When it was time for me to leave, I thanked Mrs. Odom. I climbed onto Lenny's bike and I set off for home. And as I pedaled up the road, I turned to glance back at the Odom's house. I remember that first day of school on the bus when I'd seen it and thought it was sad looking. And when I pictured all the boys in that kitchen getting so much love by their mama, that house didn't look one bit sad anymore to me. All right, so for today's stop and jot or brief notes in your notebook, I want you to write about, describe how you think she feels. How did her feelings change from towards the Odom's house? We know she thought it was a sad looking house. Then she went there. She actually got to socialize and get to know everybody in the family, and her feelings changed by the time she was riding home, looking back over her shoulder at that house. So you can give me a 4 square on Charlie's feelings, right? And you can tell me how they changed and what lets you know that. What thoughts, words, actions let you know that. Okay, I'll see you guys for chapter 10.